Good morning. Thank you guys so much for being here today. My name is Mrs. Thompson. I'm a Holocaust studies teacher here at Harmony High School. I'm so happy that you're all here to hear from our wonderful guest speaker. Just a couple of quick reminders. Do me a favor, and if you have headphones in right now, go ahead and take them out. If you have your phone, put it in your bag or your pocket. Or you should be moving it more. Thank you. I know that I don't have to remind our students to be polite, to be respectful, to not be speaking over our wonderful guest speakers today. Because just in case, we have some teachers that will be circulating to make sure that you are doing exactly what you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Mr. Pointer, who's going to introduce our guest speakers.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Very good. Thank you all for coming today. It really means a lot to us. My name is Stephen Pointer. I am from the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center, which we are located in Maitland. And I'm here to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Ms. Suzanne Schneider. But first, I wanted to provide a little bit of background and a little bit of context to her story. So who here has actually studied or knows about the Holocaust?
Oh, great.
Good. Let's see. Let me click here. So does anyone know why we use 1933 as the starting year of the Holocaust? Ms. Thompson student should have an idea. They're in the front? Okay. Yes. Hitler's appointed chancellor, and there's a second part to that. Yes. Comes a little later. But there is the first anti-Jewish laws are passed in 1933. And this is from, we actually see a boycott on Jewish stores. They removed Jews from being in civil service positions. Jews are not allowed to be teachers. They're not allowed to run in any form of government. It's removing Jewish people from any place of authority and control within the German Reich. In 1935, though, we see the Nuremberg laws passed. This is what is passed to ensure that you can define who's a Jew. Now, imagine this. This is actually the law that made Jews a race under the eyes of the Nazis, that you couldn't convert and become Christian or say you weren't Jewish. If you had grandparents that were Jewish, you were a Jew, like it or not. There was no way to not be Jewish. And if you were Jewish, you were not a what? Someone said it. You were not a citizen. And if you're not a citizen, you're not part of our community. We've decided that you don't belong. But the problem is most Jewish people couldn't just leave, nor did they want to. This was this was their home, this was their country, but they were not considered part of that anymore. Now that leads us up to, and these are key moments. Here we'll go, we're gonna do like, but if you've ever seen signs like this, these are signs that are segregating Jews from Aryans. Aryans were considered the what? Yeah, the master race. Is there a master race, by the way? No, there's not. But the benches say, the bench that she's sitting on says just for Jews. The bench he's sitting on says just for Aryans. He doesn't look like he's too uncomfortable, does he? And she's trying to hide her face. They would let a dog sit on a bench that was for Aryans before they would let a Jewish person sit on a bench that was meant for Jews, that was meant for Aryans. This sign here, this is a famous picture of a young Jewish man and his girlfriend who is German. And the signs, I'm gonna paraphrase, but the signs basically, it says on her sign that she goes, "I like to be with Jewish boys," and his sign says, "I'm ruining the German bloodline." There was a forbidding of interracial marriage, that Jews would ruin the bloodline of Germans by actually being with them. So there were laws forbidding Jews from marrying Germans put into place in the Nuremberg laws. My clicking is clicking slow. This brings us to 1938. Now, this week is Holocaust Education Week, and it is chosen for a specific reason because in November of 1938, November 9th, an event happens. Does anyone know what that event is called? The Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht. It's also known as the November Pogrom, not program, pogrom, which is an act of violence against the Jews. And this comes about as a result of lots of propaganda that had been spread throughout. But a young man had heard that his family had been shoved over into the border of Poland. They had lost their home in Germany, and they had been pushed over the border into a stateless area, and they nearly died. He was very upset. He went into the embassy, the German embassy in Paris, and asked to speak to a German officer. Anybody that would listen to him. This man comes down, a young man named Ernst von Rath, and this is Herschel Greenspan, and Herschel pulls out a gun and shoots him. He says, "This is for my family." Now, in the United States, over the next 2 days, November 9th and 10th, it's reported that Jewish stores are being destroyed, that Nazis were smashing things, but they weren't talking about the hundreds of synagogues, which are Jewish places of worship, that were burned to the ground. That the police were coming into your home and were destroying your property. You had no one to call. Oftentimes, your friends and neighbors were the ones that were pulling you out of your home. Jewish men, over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and put to camps. And this, oftentimes for many of us, marks the beginning of the end, when many people who lived in Germany said, "This is different. This marks the need to leave, to get out." Because neighbors and friends were watching. They were taking pictures. They were laughing. They were happy to also take your property. Kristallnacht is often taught as the beginning of the Holocaust, even though it didn't start with this violence. But this is the first moment of state-sponsored violent action against the Jewish people. Now, in 1937, Suzanne is born. This is Miss Suzanne Schneider, and she was born in a town in Zabadish in Poland. Her family didn't experience the Nuremberg laws. They didn't experience a lot of the things we just talked about, but ultimately would bear the brunt and the experience of what we think of as the Holocaust and ghettoization and the life thereafter. And she's going to share that story with you today. So if you could please, she's volunteered her time to come here. So if you could please give her a warm round of applause and a welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see so many young faces here. And hopefully I will not bore you, because I do have an interesting story to tell. As Stephen said, I was born in Poland, which had been the Austro-Hungarian Empire before World War I. But this was 1937, because right after the end of World War I, it became part of Poland. And I lived in a small town called Zbarasz in southeastern Poland. Now you may have heard of that area because of the war in the Ukraine, and now it's part of the Ukraine. But when I was born, there was Poland. And we lived a very comfortable life. We had a lovely house. It's a small town, so we're a well-known family because my father was a family physician. And he had a lot of patients, Polish patients, Jewish patients, Ukrainian patients. And my mother was also highly educated. She had a doctorate in Polish literature, and we had a very comfortable life. And I was a spoiled brat. I was an only child, and all they worried about were my eating habits. And I just wouldn't eat, and I was very thin and very, as I said, very spoiled. Anyhow, they were so worried about my eating problems that they actually hired a nanny that they had heard about from Germany, from Berlin, Germany, and they brought her to teach me how to eat. And she insisted on putting us in a separate room with the door closed so there would be no disturbance while I was eating. And one of my uncles, my father's older brother, decided to see what the miracle was that I would eat for her. And so he peeked through the window and he saw that she was feeding me, and then she would pinch me, my mouth, to make me swallow. Needless to say, she was back on the train to Berlin the next day. Anyhow, those were their big worries. They didn't have big worries. My mother was very busy. She had organized a group of young women to become teachers, and my father, of course, was very busy with his practice. And then, I don't know if you've heard about the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which divided Poland into two. We were in the area where the Russians would be, and of course, on the western part, it would be Germans. And in 1939, right after the Hitler-Stalin Pact, we were invaded by Russian soldiers. And it was fine. We were still in our house. And I have vague memories of Russian officers eating dinner in our house. So everything was going well. And anyhow, after a while, in 1930, does anybody know what happened on September 1st of 1938? Yes,
39.
correct. World War II.
39.
What?
39.
39, yeah.
Okay.
1939, September 1st, 1939. Hitler marched into Poland with his armies and just started moving, going east. And World War II broke out. Anyhow, within a few days, maybe a week, the Russians escaped back to Russia, and we were invaded by the Germans. And I still have vague memories, and to this day I'm petrified of motorcycles with sidecars, because all we saw pulling through the town with loudspeakers and trucks
And this
were,
is the town. I've got
oh yeah, this is the town. As I said, it was a small town. Yeah, okay, that's correct, July 6th, that's perfect, yeah. But as I said, we were under Russian occupation for about 2 years, till 1941. And that's when the Germans finally penetrated eastern Poland. And as I said, to this day, I'm frightened of motorcycles with sidecars, because that's how they came in. Soldiers were driving the motorcycle, and the German officers were in the seat, in the car seat next to the, whatever you call that.
Sidecar.
Sidecar, right. They were in the sidecar. And a lot of trucks came in with loudspeakers in German and ordering people around. And if they saw any Jewish people in the street, they would shoot them. Now, Orthodox Jews, I don't know if any of you know, but they had beards, so they were very noticeable. Of course, I didn't come from that kind of an Orthodox family. And my father was still well known in town because of his profession. And we were still in our house. And one day, my mother rushed me to another room in the house, and German soldiers came into our house. And incidentally, they called every Jewish woman Sarah. No matter what your name was, they would speak to you and tell you what to do, Sarah. Anyhow, I was in the other room, and when I came out, my mother had a gash on her forehead. And apparently what had happened is that German soldiers came in, and she had sewn all her jewelry into a girdle, under her dress. And he hit her in the head. Sarah, take off your girdle. And they came and they took her jewelry away, and she had this big gash on her head. Anyway, I know it was very frightening for us. Within a few days, edicts came out with the trucks coming in making announcements that anybody who was handicapped, Jewish people now we're talking about, had to appear at the town square, the central part of the town, I had an aunt who was my father's oldest sister who was hunchbacked. So she, of course, was considered handicapped. So she and her husband went. Now, she had a son who was 16 years old, my cousin, who was like a brother to me because I was an only child and he always used to tease me a lot. Anyway, they disappeared. They were taken away. We never knew what happened to them. And they called this an action, akcja in Polish. And a few weeks later, another akcja took place. And for whatever reason, I have no explanation for that. I was the youngest of my generation in my family because my father married late. And I had cousins who were in their 20s. A lot of them were professionals. There were two were pharmacists. One had just graduated from medical school in Prague in Czechoslovakia, and they were married. And they all went, they followed the orders in the second akcja for the intelligentsia, which meant the educated ones. And they went to that town square. And again, they were gone, and we have no idea what happened. We had no idea what happened to them. My father had warned my mother. He said to her, you stay in the house. You don't go, and I'm going to see my patients in the countryside. So just stay home. And luckily, because of what he said, we didn't end up with the intelligentsia in the town square. Anyhow, we stayed in our house for a while, and things were getting bad and worse with all kinds of things. My mother was sent to work on a road, to pave a road, and she took me along, and I remember sitting on the side watching her working. Anyhow, one day we were all told to pack as much as we could, and that we were going into a place called a ghetto. Anybody know what that is? Yes.
Like a rundown, like backwaters area, like city or something.
Yeah, it was an area in the town with little old huts there surrounded by barbed wire and with German guards on the outside. And nobody was allowed in and out except we were ended up, by the way, in a small little hut, in a one-room hut with another family, and we all slept on the floor on mattresses. The other family consisted of two elderly people, a husband and wife, and their daughter who was a dentist, and she was pregnant. Her husband had been killed earlier. So the six of us actually were in this one room. I don't remember what kind of sanitary facilities we had, which we really probably didn't, but I don't have any recollection of that. And what had started there was there was a garrison, a German garrison in another town called Tarnopol, and every so often they would just come and grab whoever they could and would take them away. So my parents and the other family came up with a hiding place for us, which was the attic in that house. And there was a ladder. And every night there was somebody on guard duty to listen for truck traffic coming from that larger city, Tarnopol. They knew there were German soldiers coming to grab anybody they could, any Jew they could at the ghetto and just take them away. And one night it so happened my mother was on guard duty. She was up at the window listening for the truck traffic, and she woke us up because she had heard a lot of noise coming from that direction. So we all went up into the attic with the ladder and pulled the ladder up behind us. And by then, by the way, I was 4 years old, and I have clear memories of that. And we heard the soldiers rummaging through that one room, taking whatever they wanted, and then they left. They did not obviously find us. Now, we had several advantages, my family and I. One of them was that my father was the physician, and they needed him in town and in the countryside. So he was allowed in and out of the ghetto, even though he wore a Jewish star like the rest of us. He was allowed in and out of the ghetto to see patients outside because there were a lot of epidemics. There was typhus, typhoid fever, cholera, you name it. So he was needed, and he befriended the guards at the gate. And again, he was in and out. So he was also able to make certain arrangements that other people couldn't. And he also was able to bring food products to us, farm products like butter or whatever meat that his patients would give him. There was no money exchanged, but food was exchanged, and we needed that. So he would bring that. Anyhow, it was going on like that. And one day, my parents, I guess, figured out that they would try to get me out of the ghetto. So they got in touch with one of my former nannies, a Polish nanny. Her name was Michalina. I still remember. And they asked her to take me out of the ghetto and take me with her little boy. And my father had rented a house outside of town because they were afraid to have me in the town because we were a fairly known family and people might recognize me. So Michalina and her little boy and I, we moved out of he had befriended the guards, so somehow or other he was able to get me out of the ghetto. And she and I and her little boy, we went to another town, and I have clear memories of hearing shooting in the middle of the night, and I was, from nerves, was throwing up because I was afraid that my parents were being killed. And I remember before I even left, my mother was crying. And just think of me at 4 years old, think of yourselves as 4 years old, that my mother was crying because she figured she'd never see me again. And I said to her, "Mommy, don't cry, I want to live." Anyway, we were in that other town, and all I remember is the throwing up in the middle of the night because I heard the shooting. And one day, her husband was still in the town, in Zbarash, and she decided that she couldn't stay there any longer. So she notified my father, my parents, that they had to take me back. So in the middle of the night, she brought me back to a park. And in the park, there was my father sitting on a bench and an old lady with him.
Goodness. Hold on.
Yes. This lady that's a picture of her as a young lady. She was much older when I saw her. Her name was Helena Sokalska. And my father said to me, "You have to go with her." So I listened to my father and I left with her and we went to her thatched roofed cottage.
Next picture's her daughter.
Oh, next picture is her daughter, Jadwiga, Polish, beautiful, beautiful young woman. And she looked like a movie star, really. Anyhow, Helena took me with her to her cottage. This is the cottage with a thatched roof, and it was outside of town, and was a one room. And when she took me there, my mother was there. She was able to greet me. I don't need to tell you the tears of joy from her and from me. What happened again, my father was able to sneak her out of the ghetto because she was not allowed to get out of there. But because he knew the guards, they let her out in the middle of the night. So there she was, the two of us were there. Now the house consisted of one large room with a big bread baking oven and a chicken coop, which was the main room was separated by a wall from a chicken coop with chickens, shelves with chickens there, which were in and out. The chickens fed outside. They were in and out of there with the door open. And the two of us sat behind a curtain made out of straw. And my mother, I would say, because it was just the two of us at the time, would tell me stories and taught me how to read. And we kept busy all day long because she had brought some books with her. But my father was not with us. And we would, in the middle of the night, we would come out when it was dark, go around the garden and go to the front door. And as I told you before, there was this big bread baking oven there, which really looked like a pizza oven that you're familiar with a big round opening. And apparently my father had been able to come there during the night and brick it up, close it, because there was a big space about this big between the ceiling and the oven. And he bricked it up because he would bring, I found that out later, of course, 1 or 2 bricks at a time in his medical bag. And he would close it up. And inside the oven, he put in steps to go up. And so we would go into the oven, take the steps, and there was a mattress on top of the oven, and that's where we slept. So here we were, just the two of us with the two ladies, and believe it or not, but we were directly across the street from the Gestapo. Anybody know what the Gestapo was?
Somewhere here?
Where?
Right here in the
Yes. Correct. It was the German officers, police, the secret police. And being Yaja, the way she was so beautiful, there were plenty of officers would come to the house there to talk to her or whatever. They admired her looks. Anyway, they would bring all kinds of food. So we always had enough food because they would provide the food to us. And slowly but surely, we were still waiting for my father. And we heard through Helena, who used to go to the market, that she heard the news that the ghetto was going to be raised, would be Judenfrei. Anybody have an idea what that means? Free of Jews, that they were going to clean it out completely. And again, my father still wasn't with us, so we were, of course, in a panic that he was also taken away. And a few nights later, we heard scratching, in the middle of the night, scratching at the door, and it was my father. So thank God the three of us were together. Now you have to understand that we had several advantages that a lot of people didn't have. My parents had an only child, which made a big difference at the time for people to survive and hide. I was old enough to keep my mouth shut. I didn't cry. I knew I had to be quiet. And also the fact that he was a physician, so he was allowed, he had made contacts outside. Anyway, we were there for quite a while, and the officers would come in and tell the ladies how the war was going on and where the front was. And my parents were fluent in German because they had spent their youth in Vienna, in Austria, during World War I, and my father went to medical school in Vienna. So they would listen to what they were saying. And my father had a map on the wall there, and he would be marking the different things that were happening with the war in the front, whatever he would hear through the wall. And one day, I was playing with one of the chickens, by the way, was my pet. And I must tell you, I love animals, so I have a cat. But this chicken was pretty smart. It responded to my commands. It would give me its paw. I love my white chicken. And I was sitting there playing with the chicken, and all of a sudden, this huge noise from another chicken that had been outside flying into the chicken coop and being followed by a German Shepherd dog. And to this day, I'm petrified of German Shepherd dogs because it was one of the German officers' dog. But it was a matter of seconds. If the officer had come into the chicken coop, we were finished. However, a German officer would not go into a dirty chicken coop. And all he did was whistled, and the dog was well trained, and the dog went back to his masters. And my father grabbed me so hard to pull me back that I lost my breath, and he went into a panic that he thought he had hurt me, but luckily nothing happened. Anyway, I forgot, yeah. I always forget to mention it, but it's very, very important for you to hear about it. Before we even left our house, my mother had made 3 little pouches that we were to wear around our neck. And I still remember the color. There was silver satin with black stripes. And as I told you before, I was a non-eater. I was kind of a brat, to say the least. And every morning I would get a lesson. If I tell you to swallow what's in there, you have to swallow. You better do it when I tell you to do it. Later on, it turned out that it was poison. That through the fact that, again, that he was a physician, he was able to obtain, because even poison you couldn't get if you wanted. It was strychnine, and I was told to swallow it. So rather than being thrown into a truck and taken away, I would just drop on this wherever I was near the truck and die from poisoning. And both my parents were going to do the same thing. So anyway, I always wore that little pouch. Even when we were in hiding, I wore it just in case we got discovered. And we were there for quite a while. I have memories of being there in the summer and being there at Christmas time and being there in the spring. This was 1943 to 1944. And again, Christmas time, the officers brought amazing amount of food to the house. So we had plenty of food all the time. And we were just waiting to see what was going to happen. As I said, vaguely, my father realized that the front was moving and Russians were approaching. And on March 1944, and I remember clearly, it was March 4th, 1944, we heard the word Tovarish in the garden. Anybody know what the word Tovarish is? No Russian-speaking people here. It meant comrade, and we knew that there were Russians. So we came out of hiding, and they greeted us. They immediately realized who we were and started hugging and kissing us and welcoming us. And all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, my cousin, and I'll tell you his story as well, Munio, his Polish name was Munio. He was the one whose mother was the hunchback. He was 16 years old. He survived without his parents. He was an orphan. And my father was very fond of him, was his nephew, and he loved him very much. And we thought that he had been killed because Helena had told my parents that that she saw him being led with a group of Jewish people to the woods. And my father said shiva for him. Anybody know what that is? No Jewish kids here? Anyway.
Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Where?
Say it again. Jewish death prayer, like.
Yes, yes, Jewish. He said shiva for him. And all of a sudden, who appears is my cousin, right when we were with the Russians. And so we were so thrilled to see him that he was alive. Shall I tell them the story, how he survived?
Yes.
Okay, I must tell you that story because it's so important. My father apparently had made arrangements for him before he went into hiding with us. He made arrangements for him to go to a small hamlet, a small village where one of his patients was. And he made arrangements with a barber in that town that he would send his nephew to him, that he should hide him. And the barber said, okay. So my cousin apparently was being led out of town with the other Jews who were captured, but he managed to sneak away. And he just went to the village. He followed the stars. And that was the only way. Of course, he didn't have GPS. He just followed the stars where the village was. But he didn't know where the barber's house was. And he sees a young woman walking a dog in the street. And he stops her and he said, would you know where the barber's house is? And she pointed it out to him. And so he goes there and he knocks on the door. This is early in the morning, knocks on the door, and the barber opens the door and he said, I know who you are. I've been expecting you. You're Dr. Schmayuk's nephew, but I cannot hide you. And there is my cousin, a kid, a teenager like you, and he has no place to go. And all of a sudden, the knock on the door again, and the young lady that he met in the street, a Polish young lady, comes in and she says, is there anything I can do to help? And she figured it out that he was a Jewish kid. And so the barber tells her that he can't hide him. She said, well, let me go home. I'll speak to my husband and my father-in-law, and we'll see if we can help. Now, remember, total stranger. She comes back and she says to my cousin, you come with me. We're going to hide you in a hayloft. And she saved his life. And after the war, he did ask her, how could you do this? How could you take such a dangerous situation? You have 3 children. She had 3 little girls. And she said, well, I was thinking that if one of my girls had the same problem that you did, that there would be somebody who would rescue her. And I couldn't let it go. It turned out also that both her husband and her father-in-law were partisans. Anybody know what that is? They were guerrilla fighters, and they were helping to break up train tracks from the Germans, and they were just fighting against the Germans in the woods. And so they were very involved in getting rid of the Germans, and they hated them. So that's why they also helped with my cousin. Anyway, I'm getting back to being liberated by the Russians in 1944, March. And all of a sudden, the front moved back with the Germans retreating back into town. So we, at that point, we weren't going back into hiding. And this was Poland in March 1944. I don't know if you're aware of the very bad and cold winters that were in Russia. We had the same thing, very cold, lots of snow. The roads were not paved, it was all mud. And we were running away from town with the Russian army. And with the horses and the tanks and whatever they had, we went with them. And I was, as I said, very small and very skinny, and the mud was very high. And my cousin, who went with us, of course, he was 16, remember, he never let me forget for the rest of his life that he carried me on his back. And he always used to tease me. He was a big tease, and he always used to tease me that he saved my life because he carried me on his back. Anyhow, to continue the story, the front moved back the Russians got back into Zbaraj, our town, and of course, we went back with them. And what happened was, it was so unexpected that they found a whole bunch of German officers in the movies. And the Russians, of course, got the prisoners, made them prisoners, and they don't know from the Geneva Convention. Does anybody know what the Geneva Convention is? Yes.
Rules about how war can be waged and what happens during a war.
Yes, and also that war prisoners were treated well, that it was supposed to be well treated. But of course, the Russians didn't listen to that. So the next morning, we all went to the town square again, and guess who was hanging there? All the German officers were hanging on the gallows. Yeah, they were hanging on the gallows, and we all went there to spit at them, including me. Anyway, we got our house back, and the beautiful thing about we walked into the house, and there was my mother's concert grand piano. She was a very fine pianist. And she sat down to play, and it was in perfect tune. And her tears started running down her face. The Jewish people were killed, but the piano was well taken care of. It turned out that the house was used by German officers, and Germans love music, and they took care of the piano, and I'm sure some of the officers played the piano. Anyhow, we were under Russian occupation, and it was my first grade, really. Should I tell them about the cats and dogs?
Well, if they go back now, go
Yeah,
ahead.
my first grade was in a Russian school. My father was made a major in the Russian army, and he was the head of the polyclinic, and we had our house back. And as I said, I started first grade in a Russian school. By then, I was fluent in Russian. I spoke Polish, and I was fluent in Russian. And we'd go into the classroom, and there was a picture of Stalin and a picture of Lenin, and we all had to bow down. And we all wore red scarves around our neck, and we wore uniforms. Every boys and girls looked exactly the same, and their heads were shaved. Anybody know why every child, except for mine? Any reason? Why would they shave children's heads? Nobody. I'm surprised. You're lucky. They were worried about lice. And the reason why my head wasn't shaved, that was the only one looked like a girl there. You couldn't tell the difference. Because